This is the Chihuahuan Desert of northern Mexico. In 1975, a research laboratory was built in the middle of the Mapimí Basin. There are research facilities and a field station for ecologists and geologists working in this reserve, and it has its own meteorological station to provide a climatic database for the research. Here, ecologists can study the plants and animals of one of the oldest and most diverse deserts of the North American continent.
Here in the Chihuahua Desert, it certainly is hot. It's about 37 degrees Celsius at the moment. In this region, it has been known to reach 49 degrees. Over there, that white area, is a salt pan where water collects and evaporates, leaving a highly saline soil. This is a common phenomenon in deserts and presents problems for plants. But the desert is far from deserted. It's full of life, but just now, in the heat of the day at the end of the dry season, the only life we can see are the plants, able to tolerate these extreme conditions of heat and drought. The major problem for all life here is to obtain and conserve water, coupled with the need to control temperature. These plants, of course, cannot escape the heat, but they do possess specialized means of conserving water. There are animals here, but with the freedom to move, they evade the hottest part of the day by retreating to their burrows. The jackrabbit has no burrow and instead shelters under plants. Its large ears help it to dissipate heat. Many rodents, like the kangaroo rat, are active at dusk and dawn when it is much cooler. Mammals are able to maintain their body temperature metabolically, but reptiles require some heat before they can be active, and they emerge in the morning and late afternoon, avoiding the coldest and hottest periods. If the desert were as arid as this, throughout the year, nothing could live here at all. But there is in fact a short and very erratic rainy season, which begins about July. These rainfall data for 1982 show an average pattern. About 25 centimetres of rain fell in the whole year, but over half of it in the 3 months July to September. In 1983, there was only about 20 centimetres of rainfall, most falling between the end of May and the end of October. This kind of variability in rainfall pattern is quite typical. Now, in early June 1984, we have already had some rain, and the dry season has just ended. The topography of the desert affects the availability of water to plants and animals. Low-lying areas, called playas, may occasionally get flooded by rain, and where drainage is poor, evaporation concentrates salts in the surface of the soil. Higher areas, at the foot of hills and mountains, receive water, but this does not accumulate. This kind of area is known as a bajada. With the arrival of the rains appear a group of organisms not to be seen in the drier part of the year. These drought avoiders include some migrant birds and also ephemeral plants, which lie dormant in the soil until the rainy season. Then, if moisture conditions are right, they rapidly germinate, grow, reproduce, and then die, leaving behind their dormant seeds as the long months of drought begin. In this program, we will look at the conditions present in this desert environment, the ecology of the animals and plants which tolerate or avoid the special problems of living here, and at the scientific work being done on these organisms by ecologists working at this desert research station.
This area here with gravelly soils is what is known as a pediment, or foot of the hill. It receives water runoff from neighboring hills and hence permits the growth of a more diverse flora. Two of the more abundant plants in the Chihuahuan Desert are the creosote bush, which is a typical desert microphyll, and opuntias, which are cacti. There are many different opuntias in the Chihuahuan Desert, and this one in particular is Opuntia rastrera. Cacti have a large and superficial root system which permits them to accumulate water in the tissue after heavy rains. On the other hand, creosote bush, Larrea tridentata, is woody. It has very small leaves which are covered by a thick resin which at the same time diminishes transpiration and deters herbivores from eating it. These leaf-like organs are not really leaves but flattened stems. The leaves have been transformed into spines which serve the same purpose as the resin in creosote bush, that is, to deter herbivores from eating the plant. The fact that the spines are really transformed leaves can be seen on the young cladodes. Ocotillo here, Fouquier resplendens, doesn't accumulate water in its tissues as Opuntia does. It has big leaves and it's not efficient in pumping water from the soil as creosote bush is. In fact, the leaves can be seen now because it rained last month, but after a dry period, it will lose its leaves and remain as a dry-looking stem for most of the year. Another drought deciduous perennial is Jatropha dioica, which can be seen here. Its bare reddish stems are a typical element of the Chihuahuan desert during dry seasons. Ferns and fern allies, which grow on rocks, remain dry but stay alive during the long dry seasons in the desert. This plant, Selaginella, or resurrection plant, has been collected in a rock and watered 4 hours ago. This second plant has been collected in the same place, but it has not been watered.
Because water is the predominant limiting factor for growth and animal activity in the desert, all ecological studies here depend upon good weather records. Every morning at 8 o'clock precisely, Carlos Herrera notes the rainfall, relative humidity and diurnal temperature range with maximum and minimum recording thermometers. This apparatus is used to measure the potential evaporation from the desert soil, which in these high temperatures is an important source of water loss. Solar radiation is also measured. It's filtered to measure PAR, the photosynthetically active radiation that can be used in photosynthesis. These kinds of climatic measurements are important, but they do not tell us much about the microclimate experienced by animals and plants. This is an entrance to a burrow of the balsan tortoise, Gophorus flavomarginatus. Gustavo Aguirre has made a particular study of this animal. Now at midday, it remains deep inside its burrow, where the temperature is a cool 30 degrees centigrade, whereas the soil temperature is well over 50 degrees. Until recently, the balsan tortoise was not described as a distinct species. It is the largest ectothermic land vertebrate in temperate North America. Its powerful front feet enable it to dig burrows 10 meters long and 1 or 2 meters deep. These underground shelters provide some protection from predators at night and enable them to regulate their body temperature within a preferred range of 28 to 38 degrees centigrade, even at midday. To monitor internal body temperature, Gustavo has encapsulated a miniature temperature sensor, radio transmitter, and battery in a pill made to be swallowed. After a few days, the tortoise will naturally pass it out of her system. The signal from the radio pill is a bleep whose rate changes with temperature. The higher the frequency, the higher the temperature. The number of bleeps in 10 seconds can be translated to a temperature reading using a calibration graph. With powerful jaws like this, a rubber bung is essential equipment. With gentle persuasion, the sterilized pill is quite easily swallowed by the anesthetized tortoise. Later, Gustavo returns the tortoise to her burrow and then can monitor her body temperature continuously, even when she is deep underground. The technique can be used for several tortoises at once. Balsam tortoises are most active above ground from 9 till 11 in the morning and 5 to 7 in the afternoon. They feed mainly on the widespread Hilaria grasslands and also ephemeral plants as these become available. Young tortoises and hatchlings get the most from the foods they eat by selecting plants with high nutritive and calorific value. The age of a tortoise can be accurately determined by counting the annual growth rings on the shell plates. After 20 years, they have attained sexual maturity, but continual burrowing wears away the growth rings. Hatchlings grow rapidly in their first few years. Their shells are still soft, with clearly visible growth rings, but few will escape predation, and so here at Mapimi, a conservation program has started for this endangered species. Eggs are recovered from the field, followed by controlled incubation. Gustavo hopes that by careful captive breeding and rearing hatchlings for several years, sufficient numbers can be reintroduced back into the desert habitat to save this remarkable reptile from extinction. In contrast, common here are insects, lizards, grasshoppers, and rodents. There are also deer, but these are much more difficult to find. The top carnivore here now is a coyote, which preys on most small animals, particularly rabbits, kangaroo rats, young tortoises, and the eggs too. More specialist carnivores are the lizards. There are two good ways to catch lizards. This one needs practice. Maria Maru is investigating the activity cycle, the partition of food and spatial organization of the lizard community.
This is Cophosaurus tejanus. It's a male. These lines distinguish its sex, very colored in the mating season. Now I will take its temperature, weigh it, measure it, mark it, and liberate it. Its body temperature now is 38.5 degrees Celsius, which fluctuates during the day. In general, the male is bigger than the female, and the weight of this adult animal is 19 grams.
Here's a more passive technique for catching lizards, pitfall traps.
This is Phrynosoma cornutum, a type of lizard common in the Bajadas, although its distribution reaches to the playa. It's a specialist feeder of ants. It's an adult male.
There are two ant-eating Phrynosoma species here. Both hunt in open space and are very active when rain stimulates ant activity. Other lizards dig and scratch the soil by shrubs, and some are wide-ranging foragers, rushing from plant to plant in search of insects. Holbroochia maculata doesn't search actively for food, but remains still and ambushes prey on bare ground, any insect that passes too close. Cophosaurus texanus, which lives in the open spaces, also practices the sit-and-wait technique. Grotophytus willicensis preys on anything it can get, even small lizards. It has membranes between its toes, which make running on sand easier. Because reptiles are ectotherms, they need to heat up in the morning sun before foraging for food. Activity starts about 33 degrees centigrade, and they thermoregulate, maintaining an average body temperature of about 40 degrees by moving between sun and shade. Most lizards retire to holes in the ground by mid-afternoon, when soil temperature can rise to 72 degrees. Only Cophosaurus texanus remains active, although it must find shade at the hottest time. After an hour or so, the others emerge again to hunt for food until sunset. A major food for lizards are grasshoppers. They are primary consumers of great quantities of vegetation, major herbivores in this desert. Eduardo Rivera has identified 32 species, many of them more abundant after rains. Trimurtotropic Palidipenis, a ground dweller, is very abundant and widely distributed, a herbivore with a mixed diet of seeds and herbaceous plants. Laria, the ubiquitous creosote bush, is specially selected by the well-camouflaged Butetics argentatus. Even so, birds find them. Most grasshoppers are diurnal, but a rare species, Schistocerca nitens, flies great distances at night, foraging from bush to bush. Phrynotetix robustus is a ground dweller, a herbivore of mixed diet which is preyed on by reptiles and spiders. A nocturnal herbivore, which is mainly a seed eater, is the kangaroo rat, a mammal.
This is the large species of kangaroo rat, Dipodomys nelsoni. It lives in burrows under mesquite plants or some other big desert shrubs and collects the seed around the burrows, which are kept in caches and eaten later. This animal doesn't drink any free water at all. It lives on the water it gets from the seeds and other plant parts it eats. For doing this, it's got a very efficient respiration system. Through its nose, it can lower the temperature of the air that is exhaled and hence condense a good part of the moisture in the air and not lose it through exhalation. Both its urine and its feces are highly concentrated and contain very little water. In this way, the animal can live practically on dry seeds. This animal has a large impact on the structure of plant communities where it lives. Because it collects seeds, it will change the germination pattern of new plants around its burrows. The seed is collected at night and it's kept in the large pouches which has at both sides of its mouth. It is later deposited in caches inside the cave. Valentina Serrano here is excavating a burrow of the big kangaroo rat, Dipodomys nelsoni. It is under a mesquite shrub, although there is no mesquite seed at present because it's been dry during the whole winter. What the animal has gathered in the caches is grass and green leaves from annuals. When the rain comes, the animal will come out and gather all the mesquite seed it can keep in the caches for the long dry season.
The wind and the runoff following rain cause seeds to collect in small depressions in the ground and around vegetation. In many areas of the desert, such as this region of Bahada, plants occur in clumps, with several species clustered around a laria bush or some other larger plant, with a metre or so of bare soil between one clump of plants and another. The precise cause of this clump distribution of plants is not known, but one explanation is that plants have arisen from seeds deposited under shrubs in caches left by rodents. Not all these seeds are eaten, and some germinate, producing islands of vegetation. Of course, another possibility is that seedlings can only survive under shrubs, where they are protected from the intense heat of the sun. The largest genus of cacti in the desert are Opuntias. In Mexico, there are over 200 species. In this area, common ones are Opuntia violacea, Opuntia microdacis, Opuntia schottii, Opuntia imbricata, Opuntia leptocorlis, and Opuntia rastrera.
The presence of cattle here now shows that there is sufficient primary production to support a low density of large herbivores. But if grazing is an entirely new phenomenon, why do the plants show such evident signs of defence? Well, some years ago, a species of Opuntia was introduced here which had no spines, and the introduced plants disappeared nearly overnight. They were eaten by rodents. So evidently these spines are a defence against rodents. But there were also, almost certainly, a long time ago, a large number of wild herbivores here which are no longer present. Certainly 40 years ago, the pronghorn antelope used to graze areas that are now grazed by cattle. We can only guess what effect the extinction of these animals has had on the flora.
Perhaps nowadays the cattle are having a similar effect. Their preferred foods are two C4 grasses, Hilaria mutica, and particularly a grass called Sporobolus aeroides. This is fairly common in pliers, which are fine soil overlying clay. In this experimental exclosure protected from grazing, ecologists are investigating the productivity of the grasses. They monitor the rainfall here, since its quantity is largely responsible for determining growth. This instrument, called a neutron probe, is used to measure the distribution of water down the soil profile. Virtually all of the moisture is in the top 50 centimetres or so. A hard clay subsoil and rapid evaporation ensures that little penetrates deeper than that. The roots of Sporobolus aeroides are also to be found in this top zone of the soil. Although Sporobolus is one of the choice foods available to the cattle and more nutritious than many of the others, it contains little water. Instead of a long walk back to the trough, cacti can provide water. The aridity of the desert makes it an ecosystem with low productivity. It is a very fragile ecosystem in which overgrazing by cattle could easily produce heavy destruction of the vegetation. Studies of cattle grazing and grass production in the desert are aimed at preventing this by managing cattle in an ecologically sound fashion.
The diversity of plants and animals in this desert may seem surprising. Life is abundant here because there is rain, but that rain is extremely unpredictable, it's small in quantity, and it's restricted to only a small part of the year. That is why this is an arid ecosystem.
Señores, voy a contarles lo que en Mapi me pasó. En el Cerro San Ignacio la reserva se fundó para conservar la flora y la fauna y algo más. La tortuga y el venado que estaban por terminar. Amigos, que quede claro que no hay zona del silencio. Los invito a conocer este bonito desierto.
S